The elevator lurched, groaned, and died with a shudder that felt like the world giving up. Elliot's heart slammed against his ribs as the lights flickered, plunging him and Caleb into a dim, amber glow. Trapped in a metal box, 30 floors above Chicago's glittering streets, the air grew thick with the weight of everything they'd never said. Elliot leaned against the mirrored wall, his sketchbook pressed to his chest like a shield. He'd always hated elevators, too small, too quiet, too much like the thoughts he couldn't escape. Caleb, his stepbrother of 2 years, stood opposite, his blonde hair catching the faint emergency light, looking like some untouchable golden boy who belonged anywhere but here. They hadn't spoken in weeks, not since the fight that left their family fractured, and now fate had locked them in a 6x6 cage with nowhere to run. "Great," Elliot muttered, his voice sharp enough to cut the silence. Of all the people to get stuck with. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't bite back. Instead, he pressed the emergency button again, the click echoing uselessly. "It's not like I planned this," he said, his tone low, almost too calm. "Just stay cool, okay?" "Cool." Elliot laughed, bitter and jagged. "You're the one who's always so damn collected, Caleb. Must be nice, never feeling anything." The words landed like a punch, and Caleb's eyes flickered with something. Hurt, maybe, or something deeper Elliot couldn't name. They'd been thrown together when their parents married, two strangers forced to share a home, a bathroom, a life. Elliot, the artist with a chip on his shoulder, always felt like an outsider in Caleb's polished world of law school ambitions and easy charm. But there was something else, too, a pull between them, electric and unspoken, that made every glance feel like a risk. Elliot's fingers tightened on his sketchbook, where he'd poured out things he'd never say aloud. Sketches of Caleb's profile, his hands, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. He'd drawn Caleb in moments of quiet, moments Elliot couldn't admit he noticed. Now, trapped in this elevator, those drawings felt like a confession burning a hole in his chest. Caleb slid down the wall, sitting on the floor, his knees pulled up. "You really think I don't feel anything?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost fragile. "You don't know me, Elliot. Then why don't you ever say anything real?" Elliot shot back, his frustration spilling over. "You're always so perfect, so untouchable. Like you're above it all." Caleb's gaze met his, steady and piercing. "Maybe I'm just trying to keep things together. For Mom. For Dad. For us. Us." Elliot's laugh was hollow. "There's no us, Caleb. You made that clear when you told me to stop being such a screw-up." The fight had been brutal. Weeks ago, over dinner, when Caleb called him out for skipping college for wasting his talent on street art. Elliot had stormed out, vowing to keep his distance. But distance was impossible now, with the elevator's walls closing in and the air growing warmer, heavier. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "I didn't mean it like that. I was scared, okay? Scared you were throwing everything away. Scared for me, or scared I'd embarrass you?" Elliot's voice trembled, betraying the hurt he'd buried. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his shoe, and the silence stretched until it felt like it might snap. "You don't get it," he said finally. "I see you, Elliot. All the time. The way you light up when you're drawing, the way you fight for what you believe in. It's a lot." Elliot's breath caught. Caleb's words were a thread, fragile and dangerous, pulling them towards something neither had dared to name. He wanted to push back, to keep the walls up, but the elevator's hum was gone, replaced by the sound of their breathing, too loud in the stillness. The emergency light flickered again, and for a moment, they were in near darkness. Elliot's pulse raced, his mind screaming to change the subject, to escape. But then Caleb spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not as put together as you think. There's stuff I've never told anyone. Stuff I can't." Elliot's grip on his sketchbook loosened. He slid down the wall, sitting across from Caleb, their knees almost touching in the cramped space. "Like what?" he asked, softer now, the fight draining out of him. Caleb hesitated, his eyes searching Elliot's face. Like I don't know who I am sometimes. Not the way you do. You're so sure of yourself, even when you're a mess. I'm just pretending. The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. Elliot wanted to laugh it off, to call Caleb out for being dramatic, but something in his stepbrother's voice stopped him. It was the first time Caleb had ever sounded real, not like the perfect son their parents adored. "You're not pretending now," Elliot said, his voice barely steady. "So what's the truth, Caleb? Who are you when no one's watching?" Caleb's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the world outside the elevator didn't exist. The air crackled with something unspoken, something that had been building for months, maybe years. Elliot's heart pounded, and he wondered if Caleb could hear it, if he could feel the same pull that made Elliot's chest ache. The elevator jolted suddenly, a grinding screech tearing through the silence. The lights flickered back on, harsh and unforgiving, and the moment shattered. Elliot scrambled to his feet, his sketchbook slipping to the floor. Caleb reached for it instinctively, his fingers brushing the cover, and Elliot's stomach dropped. "Don't," Elliot said, too quickly, lunging to grab it. But Caleb's hand froze, his eyes catching on a page that had fallen open. A sketch of him, mid-laugh, his face soft and unguarded. Caleb looked up, his expression unreadable. "You drew me?" Elliot's face burned. "It's nothing. Just practice." But Caleb didn't look away, and the weight of his gaze made Elliot feel exposed, like every secret he'd ever kept was spilling out. The elevator groaned again, and the doors shuddered, but didn't open. They were still trapped, still caught in this moment that felt too big for the space they were in. "I didn't know you saw me like that," Caleb said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I didn't know you saw me at all." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he sat back down, closer to Caleb this time, their shoulders almost touching. The sketchbook lay between them, an unspoken bridge, and for the first time, Elliot wondered if Caleb had been hiding as much as he had. The elevator's emergency phone buzzed, a voice crackling through. "Maintenance is on the way. Hang tight." Elliot and Caleb exchanged a glance, the weight of their confessions still heavy in the air. They weren't free yet, not from the elevator, and not from the truth they'd started to uncover. As the minutes ticked by, Elliot realized he didn't want to be free, not if it meant going back to the distance that had kept them apart for so long. The elevator's emergency phone went silent, leaving Elliot and Caleb in a quiet that felt louder than the city outside. Elliot's sketchbook still lay open between them, Caleb's sketched face staring up like a ghost of the moment they couldn't escape. Caleb's fingers lingered near it, hesitant, as if touching the pages might unravel something neither was ready for. Elliot's pulse hadn't slowed. He could feel Caleb's warmth, their shoulders inches apart, and it made his skin prickle with a mix of fear and something he didn't want to name. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice rough, trying to claw back control. Caleb's eyes flicked to him, soft but searching. "Why not? It's good. Really good." He paused, his fingers brushing the edge of the sketch. "You made me look I don't know. Alive." Elliot snorted, but it came out shaky. "You were alive, idiot." He snatched the sketchbook, snapping it shut, but the damage was done. Caleb had seen it, seen him, in a way no one else ever had. The thought made Elliot's chest tighten, like the walls were closing in tighter than the elevator itself. Caleb shifted, his knee brushing Elliot's, and the contact sent a jolt through him. "You don't have to hide it," Caleb said quietly. "Not from me." "Hide what?" Elliot's voice was sharp, defensive, but his hands were trembling. He hated how exposed he felt, how Caleb's steady gaze seemed to peel back every layer he'd built to protect himself. Growing up in Chicago's gritty South Side, Elliot had learned early to keep his guard up. Art was his escape, his way of making sense of a world that often felt too heavy. But Caleb? Caleb was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a storm he couldn't outrun. Caleb leaned back, his head resting against the mirrored wall, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I used to think you hated me," he said, almost to himself. "The way you'd shut me out, like I was just some rich kid invading your space. But that," he nodded toward the sketchbook, "that's not hate." Elliot's throat burned. He wanted to deny it, to say it was just a drawing, but the truth was clawing its way out. "It's not about you," he lied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just art." Caleb's lips twitched, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, art." He paused, then added, "You know, I've got stuff I don't show anyone either." Elliot raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Like what? Your perfect GPA? Your law school acceptance letters?" Caleb's smile faded, and for a moment, he looked almost fragile. "You really think that's all I am? Some poster boy for success?" He shook his head, his voice dropping. "I've been pretending for years, Elliot. Pretending I've got it all figured out. Pretending I don't feel things I'm not supposed to." The words hit Elliot like a freight train. He stared at Caleb, searching for a hint of joke, but all he saw was raw honesty, a crack in the facade Caleb wore so well. "What kind of things?" Elliot asked, his voice barely audible, afraid of the answer, but more afraid of the silence. Caleb didn't look at him. He stared at the floor, his fingers twisting together. "Things that'd make Mom and Dad lose it. Things that'd make everyone look at me differently." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Things like noticing you. Too much." Elliot's breath stopped. The air in the elevator felt too thick, too charged, like a storm about to break. He'd spent months shoving down his own feelings, telling himself it was wrong, impossible, that Caleb was his stepbrother, that it could never be more than a fleeting thought. But now, hearing Caleb's words, those thoughts roared to life, undeniable and terrifying. "You don't mean that," Elliot said, his voice shaking. "You're just stuck in here. It's messing with your head." Caleb's eyes snapped to his, fierce and unguarded. "It's not the elevator, Elliot. It's you. It's always been you." The confession hung between them, heavy and electric, and Elliot felt like he was falling, even though the elevator hadn't moved. He wanted to run, to push Caleb away, to pretend this wasn't happening. But the truth was there, in Caleb's eyes, in the way his hands trembled, in the way Elliot's own heart was betraying him. The elevator jolted again, a harsh screech of metal that made them both flinch. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before the dim, emergency glow returned. Caleb reached out instinctively, his hand grazing Elliot's arm, and the touch burned like a spark. "Don't," Elliot said, but it came out weak, more plea than command. He didn't move away. Caleb's hand lingered, his fingers curling lightly against Elliot's sleeve. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but he didn't let go. "I didn't want to say it like this. Not here. Not now." "Then why did you?" Elliot's voice cracked, his defenses crumbling. He could feel the weight of Caleb's gaze, the warmth of his hand, and it was too much, too real. "Because I'm tired of pretending," Caleb said, his voice raw. "I'm tired of acting like I don't see you, like I don't want this." Elliot's heart pounded so loud he was sure Caleb could hear it. He wanted to say something, to push back, to protect himself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he leaned closer, just enough to feel the heat of Caleb's breath, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The emergency phone buzzed again, shattering the moment. "Maintenance is 10 minutes out," the voice crackled. "You guys okay?" Caleb's hand dropped, and he leaned back, his face flushed. "Yeah," he called back, his voice unsteady. "We're fine." But they weren't fine. Not even close. Elliot's mind was a storm, his thoughts tangled with fear and longing and the weight of what Caleb had just admitted. He clutched his sketchbook tighter, as if it could anchor him, but all he could think about was Caleb's hand on his arm, the words that had changed everything. They sat in silence, the elevator's hum the only sound, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was alive, charged with possibility, and Elliot knew there was no going back. The elevator's emergency light buzzed faintly, casting long shadows that danced across Caleb's face. Elliot couldn't look at him, not after what he'd said, not with the air between them crackling like a live wire. Caleb's confession, "I see you, I want this," echoed in Elliot's head, tearing down every wall he'd built to keep his own feelings locked away. Elliot's fingers dug into the edges of his sketchbook, the paper crinkling under his grip. He wanted to speak, to say something that would make sense of the chaos in his chest, but his throat felt tight, his words trapped. Caleb sat across from him, his knees pulled up, his hands clasped tightly, as if he were holding himself together. "You can't just say that and expect me to what? Be okay with it." Elliot finally managed, his voice low, trembling with a mix of anger and something softer, something he was terrified to name. Caleb's eyes flicked up, raw and unguarded. "I didn't expect anything. I just couldn't keep it in anymore." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not when we're stuck here, and I don't know if we'll ever get another chance to be this honest." Elliot's heart stuttered. The idea of a chance felt dangerous, like stepping off a ledge without knowing what was below. He'd spent so long hiding his own feelings, drawing Caleb in secret, stealing glances when he thought no one noticed, that the thought of them being out in the open was almost too much. "Honest," Elliot said, his voice sharp. "You've been Mr. Perfect for 2 years, Caleb. Never a crack, never a flaw. And now you're telling me you've been what? Thinking about me? Like that?" Caleb flinched, but he didn't look away. "Yeah," he said simply. "Like that." The words hit Elliot like a wave, pulling him under. He wanted to laugh, to call it absurd, but the truth was in Caleb's eyes, in the way his hands shook, in the way he leaned forward, like he was reaching for something he couldn't quite grasp. Elliot's mind flashed to the past 2 years. Awkward family dinners, shared car rides, moments when their eyes met for a second too long. He'd told himself it was nothing, that the pull he felt was just his imagination, a byproduct of living in such close quarters. But now, with Caleb's confession hanging between them, those moments felt like a map leading to this exact moment. The elevator groaned, a low, mournful sound, and the lights flickered again. Elliot's pulse spiked, his instincts screaming to change the subject, to retreat. But Caleb's voice cut through the noise, soft but steady. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." Elliot's throat burned. He wanted to say he didn't feel the same, that Caleb was wrong, but the lie wouldn't come. Instead, he opened his sketchbook, his hands shaking as he flipped to a page he'd never shown anyone, a drawing of Caleb sitting on their apartment's fire escape, the Chicago skyline behind him, his face lit by the setting sun. It was intimate, vulnerable, a moment Elliot had stolen and kept for himself. Caleb's breath caught as he leaned closer, his shoulder brushing Elliot's. "When did you draw this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Last summer," Elliot admitted, his face burning. "You were, I don't know. You looked happy. I wanted to remember it." Caleb's fingers hovered over the page, not touching, like he was afraid it might disappear. "I didn't know you were watching," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know you saw me like this." Elliot's chest ached. "I didn't want to see you like that," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. It's messed up, Caleb. You're my stepbrother. We're supposed to be family, not this." Caleb's eyes darkened, but he didn't pull away. "I know," he said. "I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend it's not there. Not anymore." The elevator jolted again, a sharp lurch that made them both grab the railing. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before the dim glow returned. In that moment of darkness, Elliot felt Caleb's hand brush his, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down his spine. When the light returned, Caleb was closer, his face inches from Elliot's. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll let it go. I'll never bring it up again." Elliot's breath hitched. He wanted to lie, to push Caleb away, to keep things simple. But the truth was there, in the way his heart raced, in the way he couldn't look away from Caleb's eyes, in the way his hand still tingled from that brief touch. I can't, Elliot whispered, the words barely audible. I can't say that. Caleb's expression softened, a mix of relief and fear. He reached out, his hand hovering near Elliot's face, but he stopped short, as if afraid to cross that final line. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice breaking. Elliot didn't have an answer. The elevator felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. He wanted to lean forward to close the distance, but fear held him back. Fear of what it meant, of what their family would think, of what the world would say. The emergency phone buzzed again, the voice crackling through. 5 minutes out. You guys holding up? Yeah. Elliot called back, his voice hoarse. He didn't look at Caleb, but he could feel his gaze, heavy and expectant. They sat in silence, the sketchbook still open between them, a testament to the truth they couldn't ignore. The elevator's hum was gone, replaced by the sound of their breathing, too loud in the stillness. Elliot's mind raced, torn between wanting to run and wanting to stay, to see where this moment could lead. As the minutes ticked by, he realized something had shifted, something irrevocable. The elevator might open soon, but the door to their truth had already cracked open, and there was no closing it now. Elliot's admission hung in the air, fragile and dangerous, like a spark in a room full of gasoline. I can't say that. Those 3 words had shattered the last barrier between them, leaving him and Caleb exposed in a way that made the elevator's cramped walls feel infinite. Caleb's hand still hovered near Elliot's face, trembling, as if caught between reaching out and pulling back. Elliot's heart pounded, his mind a tangle of fear and longing. He wanted to bolt, to pretend this wasn't happening, but Caleb's eyes held him in place, steady and searching, like they could see straight through to the parts of him he'd kept hidden. The sketchbook lay open between them, its pages a silent confession of everything Elliot had tried to deny. Caleb's voice broke the silence, soft but urgent. Elliot, I don't know how to do this, but I know I don't want to stop. Elliot's breath caught, his chest tight with the weight of what Caleb was asking. Do what? He said, his voice rough, though he knew the answer. We're stuck in an elevator, Caleb. This isn't some movie where we figure it all out in an hour. Caleb's lips twitched, a faint smile that didn't hide the fear in his eyes. Maybe it's not about figuring it out. Maybe it's just about being honest. For once. Honesty. The word felt like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Elliot had spent years building walls, against his parents' expectations, against the world's judgment, against his own heart. But here, in this stalled elevator, with Caleb's gaze burning into him, those walls felt like paper ready to tear. He thought of their family, of the fragile balance they'd all tried to maintain since their parents' marriage. Their mom, Lisa, with her endless optimism, always trying to bridge the gap between her artist son and her ambitious stepson. Their dad, Michael, who saw Caleb as his pride and Elliot as a project to fix. What would they think if they knew? What would it do to the family they'd cobbled together? I don't know how to be honest about this, Elliot admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not when it could ruin everything. Caleb's hand dropped, but he leaned closer, his shoulder brushing Elliot's. It doesn't have to ruin anything, he said. It's just us right now. No one else has to know. The words were tempting, a lifeline in the chaos, but they also stung. No one else has to know. It sounded like a secret, a burden, and Elliot wasn't sure he could carry it. He'd spent too long hiding who he was, his art, his dreams, his heart, to want to hide something this big. The elevator shuddered, a low groan that made them both tense. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a split second before the dim glow returned. In that brief moment, Elliot felt Caleb's hand find his, their fingers brushing, then interlocking, warm and grounding. When the light came back, Caleb didn't let go. Elliot's pulse raced, his skin tingling where their hands met. What are you doing? He asked, his voice shaky, but he didn't pull away. I don't know, Caleb said, his thumb brushing lightly against Elliot's knuckles. But it feels right. The contact was electric, a quiet rebellion against everything that told him this was wrong. Elliot's mind screamed to pull back, to protect himself, but his body betrayed him, leaning into the touch, craving more. He looked at Caleb, at the way his eyes softened, at the faint flush on his cheeks, and for the first time, he let himself imagine what it would be like to stop fighting. The emergency phone crackled again. "We're almost there," the voice said. "Hang on." Caleb's grip tightened, just for a moment, before he let go. The loss of contact felt like a punch, and Elliot's chest ached with it. He wanted to reach out, to pull Caleb back, but the reality of the world outside was creeping in, reminding him of the stakes. "What happens when the doors open?" Elliot asked, his voice low, afraid of the answer. Caleb's eyes darkened, a mix of determination and fear. "I don't know, but I'm not going back to pretending. Not with you." Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to believe it, to trust that Caleb meant it, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd seen Caleb play the perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect everything. What if this was just a moment, a lapse, something Caleb would regret when the elevator doors opened and the world came rushing back? Before he could speak, the elevator jolted again, harder this time, and a sound of grinding metal filled the air. The door shuddered, then cracked open an inch, revealing a sliver of the hallway beyond. Elliot's heart sank, the real world too close, too real. Caleb stood, offering a hand to help Elliot up. Their fingers brushed again, and Elliot felt that same spark, that same pull. He took Caleb's hand, standing close enough to feel the heat of his body, and for a moment, they were the only two people in the world. The doors groaned, opening wider, and the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Maintenance workers called out, their voices muffled but growing closer. Elliot's grip on Caleb's hand tightened, a silent plea to hold on to this moment just a little longer. "Elliot," Caleb said, his voice low, urgent. "Whatever happens, I meant it. All of it." Elliot nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The doors were almost open now, the gap wide enough to see the hallway's fluorescent lights, the world they'd have to face. He let go of Caleb's hand, but the warmth lingered, a promise and a question all at once. As the maintenance workers pried the doors open, Elliot glanced at his sketchbook, still lying on the floor. He picked it up, holding it close, and met Caleb's eyes one last time before the world rushed in. Whatever came next, they'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. The elevator doors screeched open, flooding the confined space with harsh fluorescent light from the hallway. Elliot squinted, his heart still racing from Caleb's touch, from the weight of their shared confession. The maintenance workers, two men in coveralls, peered in, their faces a mix of relief and impatience. "You guys all right?" One of them asked, his voice gruff as he wedged a crowbar into the door to keep it open. "Yeah," Caleb answered, his voice steady but quieter than usual. He glanced at Elliot, a fleeting look that carried the weight of everything they'd just said, everything they'd felt. Elliot nodded, clutching his sketchbook like a lifeline. His legs felt unsteady as he stepped out into the hallway, the cool air shock after the stifling warmth of the elevator. Caleb followed, his shoulder brushing Elliot's as they moved, a silent reminder of the connection they couldn't ignore. The workers muttered something about a faulty cable and started working on the elevator, their tools clanging in the background. Elliot and Caleb stood in the hallway, the distance between them growing with every second the real world intruded. The 32nd floor of their Chicago apartment building felt too bright, too exposed, like it could strip away the fragile truth they'd uncovered. "You want to head up?" Caleb asked, nodding toward the stairwell. His voice was cautious, like he was testing the ground between them. Elliot hesitated, his mind still reeling. The elevator had been a bubble, a place where they could be honest, but out here, with the world watching, everything felt heavier. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice rough. "Let's go." They climbed the stairs in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. Elliot's thoughts were a storm. Part of him wanted to grab Caleb, to demand they talk about what happened, to figure out what it meant. But another part, the part that had learned to survive by keeping his guard up, screamed to pull back, to protect himself from whatever this was. When they reached their apartment, Caleb fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking slightly. Elliot noticed, and his chest tightened. Caleb, the guy who always had it together, was unraveling, and it was because of him. Inside, the apartment was quiet, their parents still at work. The familiar clutter, Lisa's yoga mats, Michael's law books, Elliot's paint-splattered jeans draped over a chair, felt like a reminder of the life they were supposed to live, the roles they were supposed to play. Elliot dropped his sketchbook on the kitchen counter, his fingers lingering on the cover. Caleb stood by the window, looking out the Chicago skyline, his back to Elliot. "We need to talk about this," he said, his voice low but firm. "We can't just pretend it didn't happen." Elliot's stomach twisted. "What's there to talk about?" he said, his tone sharper than he meant. "We got stuck, we said some stuff. Doesn't mean it changes anything." Caleb turned, his eyes narrowing. "You don't believe that. I saw it in your face, Elliot. You feel it too." Elliot's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to deny it, to push Caleb away, but the memory of their hands intertwined, of Caleb's confession, was too vivid. "And what if I do?" he said, his voice breaking. "What then? We're not supposed to feel this. You know that." Caleb took a step closer, his expression a mix of frustration and longing. "I know it's not simple. I know it's messy, but I can't keep pretending I don't care about you. Not like this." The words hit Elliot hard, stirring something deep and aching. He thought of the nights he'd stayed up, sketching Caleb's face, telling himself it was just art, just a way to process the chaos of their blended family. But it had always been more, and now Caleb was saying it out loud, making it real. "What do you want, Caleb?" Elliot asked, his voice raw. "You want us to what? Sneak around? Lie to everyone? Risk everything?" Caleb's face fell, but he didn't back down. "I don't have all the answers. I just know I don't want to lose this. Lose you, before we even figure out what it is." Elliot's throat burned. He wanted to believe Caleb, to trust that they could navigate this, but the fear was overwhelming. He'd already lost so much, his old life, his sense of belonging, when their parents got married. Could he risk losing what little stability he had left? Before he could answer, the front door opened, and Lisa's voice called out, "Boys, you home?" Her cheerful tone was like a bucket of cold water, snapping them back to reality. Caleb stepped back, his expression shuddering. Elliot's heart sank, but he forced a neutral look as Lisa walked in, her yoga bag slung over her shoulder. "You guys okay?" she asked, her eyes flicking between them. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just elevator got stuck," Elliot said, his voice flat. He avoided Caleb's gaze, but he could feel it, heavy and expectant. Lisa frowned, her maternal instincts kicking in. "That's awful. Are you sure you're okay?" "We're fine," Caleb said, his voice too smooth, too controlled. "Just a little shaken up." Lisa nodded, seemingly satisfied, and headed to the kitchen. "I'll make some tea. You boys want some?" They both mumbled excuses, retreating to their separate rooms. Elliot closed his door, leaning against it, his heart still racing. He opened his sketchbook, staring at the drawing of Caleb on the fire escape, and felt a pang of longing so sharp it hurt. He didn't know what came next, but he knew Caleb was right. They couldn't pretend it didn't happen. The elevator had changed everything, and now they had to decide what to do with the truth. Elliot's room felt too small, the walls pressing in as he sat on his bed, his sketchbook open to the drawing of Caleb. The lines of Caleb's face, soft and unguarded in the sunset, seemed to mock him now, a reminder of the truth he couldn't escape. He'd locked himself away to avoid Caleb's eyes, to avoid the pull that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. Outside, the apartment was quiet, Lisa's tea kettle whistling faintly in the kitchen. Elliot's mind replayed the elevator, their hands touching, Caleb's confession, the way the air had felt alive with possibility. He wanted to hate Caleb for saying it, for making it real, but he couldn't, because he felt it too, and that scared him more than anything. A soft knock on his door startled him. "Elliot." Caleb's voice was low, hesitant. "Can we talk?" Elliot's heart leapt, but he forced his voice to stay steady. "Not now," he said, louder than he meant. He couldn't face Caleb, not with Lisa in the next room, not with his own thoughts still a mess. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps retreating. Elliot let out a shaky breath, his fingers tracing the edges of the sketchbook. He wanted to rip the drawing out, to destroy the evidence of his feelings, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he shoved the book under his pillow and paced the room, trying to outrun the truth. The next few days were torture. Caleb was everywhere: breakfast, the living room, the hallway, and every glance felt like a question, every brush of their shoulders a spark. Elliot threw himself into his art, painting murals on the south side with his crew, losing himself in the spray of color and the hum of the city. But even there, Caleb's face haunted him, creeping into every line he drew. One evening, as Elliot returned home, paint splattered and exhausted, he found Caleb waiting in the living room, his law books spread out but untouched. The apartment was empty, their parents out for dinner, and the silence was deafening. "We can't keep avoiding this," Caleb said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. He stood, closing the distance between them, and Elliot's heart raced. "There's nothing to avoid," Elliot lied, his voice sharp. "We got stuck, we said some stuff. It's done." Caleb's eyes narrowed, hurt flashing across his face. "You don't mean that." "I know you don't." Elliot's fists clenched, his frustration boiling over. "What do you want from me, Caleb? You want me to admit I feel something? Fine, I do. But it doesn't change anything. It can't." "Why not?" Caleb's voice rose, a rare crack in his composure. "Why can't it change anything? Because of Mom and Dad? Because of what people might say?" "Yes." Elliot snapped, his voice echoing in the quiet apartment. "Because there are parents, Caleb. Because we're supposed to be brothers, not whatever this is." Caleb took a step closer, his eyes blazing. "We're not brothers, Elliot. We're two people who got thrown together, and maybe that's why this happened. Maybe it's not wrong." Elliot's breath hitched, his resolve crumbling under the weight of Caleb's words. He wanted to argue, to push back, but Caleb was so close now, his warmth filling the space between them. "You don't know what you're asking for," Elliot said, his voice breaking. "You don't know what this could do to us." "I know I'd rather risk it than lose you," Caleb said, his voice raw. He reached out, his hand cupping Elliot's face, and the touch was like a spark, igniting everything Elliot had tried to bury. For a moment, they stood there, frozen, the world narrowing to the space between them. Then Caleb leaned in, his lips brushing Elliot's, tentative and soft, a question more than a kiss. Elliot's mind screamed to pull away, but his body betrayed him, leaning into the kiss, deepening it, letting the world fall away. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, Elliot's heart was a storm. "This is a mistake," he whispered, but he didn't move away. "Maybe," Caleb said, his forehead resting against Elliot's. "But it's our mistake." The sound of the front door unlocking shattered the moment. They sprang apart, hearts pounding, as Lisa and Michael's voices filled the apartment. Elliot's face burned, his mind racing with guilt and fear and something brighter, something that felt like hope. "Boys," Lisa called, her voice cheerful. "You hungry?" Caleb's eyes met Elliot's, a silent promise passing between them. "Yeah," he called back, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We're coming." They joined their parents in the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken tension. Elliot avoided Caleb's gaze, but he could feel it, a pull that wouldn't let go. As they sat through dinner, pretending everything was normal, Elliot knew nothing would ever be the same. That night, alone in his room, Elliot pulled out his sketchbook and started a new drawing. Not of Caleb, but of them, standing together in the elevator, hands intertwined, the city skyline faint in the background. It was a risk, a rebellion, but it felt like the truest thing he'd ever drawn. The kiss lingered in Elliot's mind like a melody he couldn't shake. Days passed, but the memory of Caleb's lips, the warmth of his touch, followed him everywhere, through the crowded streets of Chicago, in the quiet of his room, in the lines of every sketch he drew. They hadn't spoken about it since, but the air between them was different now, charged with a secret that made every glance feel like a spark. Elliot threw himself into his art, painting a mural on a community center wall, the colors bold and defiant, a reflection of the chaos in his heart. Caleb, meanwhile, buried himself in his law studies, but Elliot caught him stealing glances, his eyes soft and questioning, as if waiting for Elliot to make the next move. They danced around each other, careful and quiet, in the shared space of their apartment. Lisa and Michael noticed nothing, their lives too busy to see the tension simmering beneath the surface. But for Elliot, every moment with Caleb was a tightrope walk, balancing between fear and longing, between what was and what could be. One night, a week after the elevator, Elliot found Caleb on the fire escape, the city skyline glittering behind him. The air was crisp, the October wind carrying the scent of autumn and asphalt. Caleb sat with his knees pulled up, a beer in his hand, his face lit by the glow of distant lights. "Couldn't sleep?" Elliot asked, stepping out to join him, his heart racing at the sight of Caleb in the same spot he'd drawn last summer. Caleb glanced up, his smile faint but real. "Something like that." "You?" Elliot shrugged, sitting beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder. "Just needed some air." They sat in silence, the city humming below, the space between them alive with everything they hadn't said. Elliot's fingers itched to draw, to capture this moment, but instead he spoke, his voice low. "What are we doing, Caleb?" Caleb's eyes met his, steady and unguarded. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to stop." Elliot's chest tightened. "And if it falls apart? If Mom and Dad find out? If we can't handle it?" Caleb set his beer down, turning to face Elliot fully. "Then we deal with it. Together. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'm saying it's worth it. You're worth it." The words hit Elliot like a wave, washing away the last of his defenses. He thought of the life he'd fought for, his art, his independence, his refusal to fit into anyone's mold. And now, here was Caleb, offering something he'd never dared to hope for, a chance to be seen, to be wanted, not in spite of who he was, but because of it. Elliot reached out, his hand finding Caleb's, their fingers intertwining like they had in the elevator. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want this too." Caleb's smile was soft, radiant, and for a moment, the world felt right. He leaned in, and this time, the kiss was sure, steady, a promise sealed in the quiet of the night. Elliot's heart soared, the fear still there, but drowned out by the warmth of Caleb's touch, the certainty of their connection. They stayed on the fire escape, talking until the sky began to lighten, sharing truths they'd kept hidden for too long. Caleb spoke of his fear of failing, of not being enough, of the pressure to be perfect. Elliot confessed his own doubts, his struggle to belong, his need to create something true. And through it all, they held on to each other, building something new, something fragile but real. Weeks later, they found ways to steal moments, quiet walks along Lake Michigan, late-night talks in Caleb's room, sketches shared in secret. They were careful, keeping their parents in the dark, but every touch, every glance, was a rebellion against the world's rules, a declaration of who they were. One evening, as they sat together in Elliot's room, Caleb traced the lines of a new drawing, a sketch of them on the fire escape, hands linked, the city alive behind them. "This is us," he said, his voice full of wonder. "This is real." Elliot nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah," he said, "it is." They didn't have all the answers. The world outside was still complicated, still judgmental, still full of risks. But in that moment, with Caleb's hand in his, Elliot knew they'd face it together. The elevator had trapped them, but had also set them free, giving them the courage to choose each other, to choose love, no matter what came next. As they leaned into each other, the Chicago skyline stretching out before them, Elliot felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. They'd found something worth fighting for, something worth risking everything for. And that, he realized, was enough.